Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Philosophy with Phil. So today I wanted to talk about the division of the arts and the sciences. It's one of the first things that I do with my undergraduates after kind of the introduction of the course and stuff like that. And actually before I start our covering of logic, I kind of briefly go over then this division of the sciences and the arts and what I mean by those things. Normally I'd have like a whiteboard that I can draw on and I could sketch this out for you and all, but since we're just here taking a ride, we'll have to adapt this a little bit. I can start off, I suppose, simply with our definition of art first, right? If we're going to talk about the division of the arts and sciences, we should talk about them in order, and the arts come first. I'll explain why in a bit, but first, just the definition of an art. Any art, and there are different types of arts, right? We know the fine arts, of course, performance and theater, painting, sculpting, whatever. There are also the liberal arts, if you're familiar with education, the trivium and the quadrivium of logic, rhetoric, grammar, arithmetic, music, geometry, and astronomy. So those are the liberal arts. And then there are also the servile arts, so things like the medical art, engineering, we might group the culinary arts into that, carpentry, all these other things, right? So first things first is that the arts have to do with making something, right? So the arts are concerned with making something generally outside of the agent. So like a carpenter makes chairs, tables, whatever, right? A physician, a doctor makes health in their patient. A chef, makes a dish, whatever, right? So it's concerned with making something that is outside of the agent. And so this brings us to our definition of an art, which is an intellectual capacity. An art is an intellectual capacity that is acquired by practice. So it's something that you have to do repeatedly to get a hold of. An intellectual capacity acquired by practice of making something in accordance with reason, in a reasonable way, right? So there's three parts to this definition, right? An art is an intellectual capacity. It's a knowing how to do something that's acquired by practice, something that's done repeatedly until it kind of becomes a habit. And then third, of making something in accordance with reason, of doing something making something in a reasonable way. Now, the reason the arts come first, at least regarding the servile arts, is because they were necessary for survival, right? If you're going to survive as a community, you need doctors, you need carpenters, people who can build houses, people that make clothes, people that can farm and produce food, and so on, right? You need these things in order for a society just to survive. And this is the reason that the arts developed first, right? The art of making things, because they were necessary. But, and I think it's Aristotle who points this out, but others certainly have. It was in places like Egypt later on where you had the emergence of a leisurely class, right? A class of people that didn't have to work for a living. So they weren't concerned with just survival, and so they were able to turn their attention to other things, right? So they were able to turn their attention to what we would call the sciences, right? So they could turn their attention to learning something just for the sake of learning them, right? The arts were necessary because of survival. You have to have doctors and carpenters and people that make clothes and food and all that. But if you don't have to worry about those things, you can turn your attention and your mind towards higher things. And in fact, one of the first sciences that really developed because of this was geometry, right? You could turn your attention to the skies, you notice the movement of the planets, and you start to figure this out. So we have this division, at least in the beginning, right? So between the arts that are concerned with making something It's a certain kind of knowledge that is for the sake of making something. And the sciences, on the other hand, is knowledge for its own sake. Right? So not for the sake of making anything, not for the sake of doing anything. It's knowledge for the sake of having knowledge. You might even call it a kind of satisfaction of curiosity. Okay, so to break down this division of the arts and the sciences, it's worth pointing out that all learning requires two things. Learning requires order and distinction. Now, what I mean by order is that you see the relation between things. That's what I mean by order, right? You see how things are related to each other. But learning also requires distinction, which means understanding what something is not. So you see the way that all these different things relate to each other, that's order. But then to know what something is and what it isn't, that's distinction. And all learning requires at least those two things, order and distinction. Okay. When we look out over the broad scope of human knowledge, we find that there are three kinds of order. First, something we've already discussed is that there is an order that reason produces in nature. Now, I may have jumped the gun just a little bit. The reason the centers around reason is because as human beings, we are rational animals. The way that we understand the world is going to come through our reason. And so our reason has a threefold order to reality. And first, as we've discussed, there's the order that reason produces, that we make. And these are the arts. The fine arts, the liberal arts, the servile arts, and all of their distinctions between them. Right? And it's not really important that I go into all of those distinctions, since, I listed the liberal arts. The servile arts, I explained what they are, gave a few examples, and we generally know the fine arts when we talk about them. But this is an order that reason produces outside of itself. There's a second order that reason does not make, but that reason discovers in reality. Right? So that when reason looks out onto the world, we see certain patterns and modes of operation. And these are the sciences. And it's important then to underlie this relation that reason does not make or produce anything here, right? Reason takes what is given by the world. It requires, first of all, recognizing that there is a mind-independent reality outside of the understanding agent, but also that the mind-independent reality that exists outside of the agent is intelligible to us, right? That we can understand it. And these are the sciences, so-called, sometimes called the speculative sciences or the theoretical sciences, because they are learned only for their own sake. And there's a broad division of the speculative sciences. There are three main speculative sciences that we group under, first of all, natural philosophy. And of course, under natural philosophy is the philosophy of nature, of course. And then what we would even term today the hard sciences of physics, biology, and chemistry. That these fall under a philosophy of nature, right? The natural world, our understanding of the natural world. There is a second broad division in the speculative sciences above the philosophy of nature, and this is the science of mathematics. Mathematics that follow upon an order of abstraction. Now, we can talk about abstraction in another video. Indeed, we'll probably have to. But long story short, so like right now, I'm driving, and I see in front of me the steering wheel, right? And there's a certain quality to this steering wheel that I understand as circularity. Now, those of us, if you've taken geometry or if you remember geometry, you know that no real circles, no true circles exist anywhere, right? These things, these shapes, these numbers, whatever, they only exist then in an abstracted form in the intellect. But nevertheless, to know the quantity of something, and this is what mathematics studies, right? It's the science of quantity. When we do the video on the 10 categories, we'll see that quantity is the first of the accidents after substance. Okay. So anyway, to know something about a being's quantity is to know something about it. To really know something about it, and this is why mathematics is a science proper. Why geometry, algebra are proper sciences, and why they're worth knowing for their own sakes. And it's because it's worth knowing them in themselves, because in so doing, you actually come to understand something about reality itself, right? Namely, its quantitative aspect. And the last broad division in the speculative sciences after, so natural philosophy and all that that entails, mathematics and all that that entails, is the penultimate human science, philosophy proper, right? The science of metaphysics, the science of being itself, right? Being as being. And I understand if that's difficult to understand just the way that I describe it here, but of course metaphysics is a difficult science, right? You actually have to do the other sciences first. You have to do natural philosophy. You kind of have to study mathematics first in order to be in a place to understand and to enter into metaphysics. And again, we can talk about that at another time. So these are the sciences that result from the order that reason discovers in nature. Now, there is one last order that relates to reason in reality, and it's not one that reason makes. It's not one that reason discovers, but it is an order that is revealed to reason. And this is the science of theology. Right now, for the most part, this is a channel about philosophy, so I will leave theology to the side. But if you read St. Thomas, you understand for him that theology is a proper science. It's the science of God. But it takes its principles not from what's known by human reason, but what is given by divine revelation. And this is what makes it a different science. Right? It has different principles. So theology studies reality not from what's known by human reason, but from what is given by God in revelation. And as such, that is the highest science, properly speaking. But again, since we're mostly talking philosophy here, we can leave the science of theology aside for the moment, and we will mostly be talking about those other two orders, right? The order that reason produces and the order that reason discovers. And philosophy has to do with these things. So that's the basic division of the arts and the sciences according to, as they relate to human reason. You could probably, if you wanted to Google or image search a map of knowledge or the division of the arts and sciences, you could probably find a pretty decent image somewhere. It's probably not the same way that I would give it, but, you know, we have to work with what we've got. All right, so there it is, the division of the arts and the sciences. Thank you guys for checking out this video. I hope it was helpful. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If not, that's all right. Let me know how I can improve. As always, if you feel like dropping a comment, a topic that you would like for me to cover, please go ahead and do so, and we'll take care of that. All right. Thank you guys for checking out this video. Have a great day. Talk to y'all next time.